You're listening to the Product Coalition podcast with Jay Stansel. This is where product mastery happens. This is where careers are made. Welcome to the Product Coalition podcast. Let's go.
Welcome back, everyone. Really excited to have another Product Coalition episode ready for you today. And today we're tackling a question that every product manager faces at some point, which is, do we really need research? Today is Anna Bello-Elliott, founder and principal user experience researcher at Bello Insights Lab. Now, Anna has spent over a decade building human-centered solutions across industries, from fintech giants like Capital One to global platforms like Indeed, and even startups navigating complex supply chain risk challenges as well. Anna's work has given her a front row seat to the pressures that product teams face, and she's developed a practical framework to help PMs decide when research is truly essential. At Bello Insights Lab, Anna partners with product teams to turn those fuzzy goals into clear, helping them uncover unmet customers and treat research as a powerful form of risk management. Also a trained design thinking facilitator who thrives in guiding those cross-functional teams through ambiguity toward aligned, fast decisions. So in this episode, we're going to explore how to tell the difference between a real customer need and an internal assumption. We're going to look for the signs your team is skipping when it comes to research, and when it shouldn't, and when it's okay to go scrappy versus bringing in a dedicated researcher. So if you've had decisions with confidence and avoid costly research missteps, this conversation is going to be for you. Anna, welcome to the show. Really excited to go back to my design roots and have this conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Jay.
Anna, can I ask, before we get into this specific topic, why for you was this a topic that you were passionate enough to want to come and talk to the audience about?
Yeah, over the years working with various product teams, I've seen how challenging it is to figure out when do we need research versus when we don't. And the product manager has a very hard job. I have a lot of empathy for what I see product managers go through, because there is so much pressure for many different directions, including from the UX team. And as somebody that comes from the UX side, I know how passionate I am about making sure that I'm representing user needs. But I also know that the product manager has to balance what's going on with engineering and what's going on with leadership. And then you also have the UX side of the house, and you have marketing. So I know there's a lot of pressure to try to do the right thing, have as much data as you can, but you're also pressured to move fast. And so in that kind of environment, I do feel that teams need those frameworks, or at least those basic questions that you can ask yourself to determine, do we have what we need in order to move forward, or do we need additional information, evidence, data, research?
Okay. Let's start with big companies and nimble startups. Where do either one of those start when it comes to really understanding, do we really need research for this? How do product teams tell that difference between real customer needs and those internal assumptions?
Yeah, I think the first sign is if the conversations aren't happening. If you and your team don't know, what problem is your user actually facing? What is your user trying to solve? If you don't have clarity on who you're building for, what motivates them, or if you have things like metrics that are trending down and you don't know why, or a lot of support tickets or calls because your customer can't figure out how to do something, or they are encountering a lot of the same issues, or maybe you're getting negative reviews. Those are definitely signs that more evidence, more research is needed in order to make design and product decisions.
Okay, we spoke in the introduction there about how addressing this question really is risk management. Is there some early moments or moments throughout your career where you've come to realize this piece around risk management and knowing when to go deep in research and when not?
Yes. So I actually started my career in cybersecurity and prior to UX. And I spent 5 years working with ethical hacking and vulnerability management teams. And in the cybersecurity world, risks have to be documented, they have to be acknowledged. And I worked at financial institutions where they're under heavy regulations. And so typically, when a risk comes up, and a product team can't fix it, they have to have the conversations. They have to document it. They have to have leadership acknowledge that, hey, we're taking on this risk by not taking an action. And so I think we need something similar in our discipline, maybe not as formalized and as heavy, but something where we're at least having the discussion of what is the risk that we're taking on by not taking an action. Because the risk that we take on when we're building products that are going to need redevelopment later or that are going to be really buggy, that's still a risk. That's going to cost time, effort, resources. And so that's the kind of mindset that I think we need in UX, is to, at the very least, acknowledge what is the risk that we're taking on when we're not doing research? What are the consequences? And making sure that we're having those conversations with leadership to have them acknowledge, like, hey, we're consciously making this decision as a team. Are we good to move forward with this and with the consequences that this could bring?
Okay. You touched on some signs earlier. You spoke about signs as to whether teams are skipping research or not, and the appropriateness of that.
Yeah.
Let me go into that a little bit more. For product leaders, what are some of the signs they could either be self-reflecting on with regards to things that look out for of am I trying to move too fast here? Should I go a bit slower? That product leaders should be looking down to their teams who are working on a problem and actually maybe identifying, hey guys, let's maybe bring this back a step and reconsider whether we need research if the delivery or the solution is already up and running.
Yeah, so there is 4 questions that I love asking teams, and even using that as a framework, so that when those moments come up, you at least have this foundation, these 4 questions to think through. And the first one is, do we know what customer needs we're solving for? If the answer to that is no, then that's a pretty clear indicator that we need to go back to the drawing board and figure out what we don't know and how we're going to learn that. The second question is, if you did answer yes, we know what customer needs we're solving for, the next question is, how do we know that there is a customer need? What's the evidence? What is the data? Is this anecdotal? Is this based on, oh, it's just this gut instinct that I have? So I think thinking critically about, how do we know this? And do we have evidence? And the third question is this impacting more than one customer? Because one thing that I have seen teams hyperfixate on, especially in the B2B space, where you have, customers that are worth a lot, that are paying a lot of money for your product, and a couple of customers say one thing about the product, but just remember, you're making decisions. You're not making boutique software. If you were making software just for them, okay, then, they're your stakeholder. But when you're making a product that is going to impact a lot of users, making sure that we have enough evidence to know that this isn't something that is just impacting one user, one customer, and that it's a broader problem. So that's something that I really like to ground teams on, that we're not just like taking action and building features just because one customer said a thing, that we're making those decisions based on research and on evidence. And then the last question. Oh, go ahead, Jay.
No, sorry. Go on. Please finish. Please finish.
Yeah, the last question that I like asking, we've already touched on this, is what is the risk if we move forward without conducting user research and discovery? And it doesn't have to be done by a user researcher. It's just, we need to make sure that the cycles are happening, whether that's product doing it sometimes I've seen engineering take an interest, or that is the design doing the research. But making sure that we're grounded on what is the risk if we move forward, and most importantly, what are the consequences, and are we okay with those consequences?
Okay, but my question was going to be, when answering those questions, Anna, what is there some common false positives that people come up with, that, or how do you recommend people check for false positives when working through that?
I think it's going back to, what evidence do we have? How do we know a thing? And are we making decisions based on, either leadership noticed a thing and they had a conversation with a customer, right? Like going back to, it's the need of that one customer versus many. I think at the end of the day, grounding ourselves on what is the evidence that we have? How do we know this information? And assumptions are okay. They're a starting point. But if we have an assumption, how can we get more information? How can we validate that and make sure that what we're the evidence that we're looking at, it's solid enough and makes sense.
PMs are facing leadership, and that leadership may be skeptical about the need for either bringing in researchers or completing in-house research. Often the conversation is going to be around, this is going to slow us down. What are ways you recommend people flip that conversation to, in fact, this will save us time and money?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it goes back to that risk discussion of what are the consequences if we don't do this? Are we going to have to spend time rebuilding something later? That's going to cost time, resources, effort. What are, the costs from an engineering perspective, from a design perspective, if you have to go back to the drawing board? What is the impact to your product, to your brand? Because if you're releasing something that's half-baked and people are, that you don't want that to be the first experience that someone has with your product, because they're not going to come back. So I think that those are the discussions that need to be had at the end of the day, is what are the risks and what are the consequences? And are we okay with that? Because moving faster right now doesn't necessarily mean that long-term, that was the right strategy. Even if you have to add 2 more weeks to your roadmap, that is time well spent over the losses that you could encounter later by either losing on conversions, losing users, or even the reputational hit of a product that wasn't done correctly or implemented appropriately.
Okay. With regards to that risk research matrix that we were talking about, could you maybe introduce when's the wrong time to be focusing on that? When I'm working with product and engineering teams, often I'm having a conversation. Is this a known problem, known solution, or known problem, unknown solution, or maybe unknown problem, unknown solution? But where do you see this matrix being appropriate? And as I say, is probably, when is it inappropriate? And you actually,
yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, if there are things that we're doing that are minor, that are not going to have a huge impact to the experience, maybe they're bug fixes or enhancements that don't impact the user experience, then those are times where more likely than not, it is safe to move forward without doing user research. But if we're doing something major, like introducing a brand new feature or exploring a user problem or targeting a new audience, those are the times where those conversations really need to happen.
Okay. Within that, we all know how, as humans, we get emotionally attached to those solutions that we think are great, and research ideally is there to either prove or disprove that theory. When you're working with customers, or when you're working on your own solutions, what are some of those common emotional traps that you're looking out for, or you're looking out for in others? And how do you believe that research can help break those emotional attachments to solutions down?
Yeah, as a researcher, even if I was involved in coming up with the solution, I'm usually a few steps removed from what that solution looks like. And, I know that specifically for design and product, a lot of times they're more tied to that solution. You've spent time and effort making this thing a reality, understanding it, breaking it down, and you may really believe in the thing that you've come up with. But I think those are the moments where putting that solution, that thing that you've built in front of other people, because ultimately you're creating something that you want other people to use and to enjoy and to find useful. I think leveraging your user research partners or even the designers that do research, those are the moments that you have to let go of your solution and see what happens when you actually put it in front of other people. Because after 10 years of doing user research, believe me, people will do things you never thought about with your product. Like it's inevitable. And I think walking into that with an open mind, not so much they're doing it wrong. I've had situations like that. They're doing what, it's such a precious thing to have that opportunity to see somebody use what you built. And it's such a great learning opportunity that it can be hard. You're attached to your thing, you've built it, it's your baby. But at the same time, leaning on those partners, whether that is research or even other designers, to help bring in that perspective, I think it's invaluable and will ultimately help you create that better solution.
Okay. One of the constant trade-offs here is going to be this timepiece that you spoke about. And, thinking back to the creation of design sprints, probably now 15 years ago, one of the challenges that came from the research community at the time was by compressing everything down into a 5-day period, you're going to lose out on some opportunities that you'd get the benefit of time. Can I ask, for plays like design sprints, for certain types of problems, and what else are you using other than design sprints to structure the right research for the right problem at the right time?
Yeah, I think two things. So the first one, if working within sprints, design is always ahead of engineering and research has to be even further ahead. So that is when I have seen things be most successful. And it can be challenging because sometimes a team doesn't know what it's building till very close to the start of a sprint. But I do think it is so important to bring in your research and design partners early on in those discussions so that they can help you figure it out. You don't have to figure it out alone. But a researcher can tell you, in working through with the researcher, what are the questions we need to solve? They can come up with a plan to help work through that, maybe in sprint 0 or in sprint -1 or -2. We need to make sure these things are done so that when sprint 1 kicks off, we have the right inputs into that. The other piece is the researchers probably know if you have a research team in-house, your researcher probably knows your user really well. And so leaning on that, because as we're doing research, there's never research that you do and there isn't information that you don't learn that helps in another research project, if that makes sense. Those are times where I think it's important to make sure that you're, as a product manager, in sync with research to help you understand, okay, what are the things that you're seeing that could help us determine where we need to do additional research and what could be part of our future roadmap.
Okay. For many product managers out there, they won't have that internal research support, and they'll try and go scrappy and get things done for all the best intentions. But there's clear value in bringing external researchers into the process that's upcoming. How do you recommend people work out when to engage with someone like yourself to bring in that value versus go at it alone and get through it?
Yeah, I guess, one of the things that is challenging is people have a certain perception of research sometimes, almost like anybody can come in and do it. And I'm not saying that anyone can't learn. Yes, absolutely, you can learn, but there are some principles to keep in mind to make sure that you're not biasing your research. And I have seen moments where if you're not doing research correctly and you're taking that research and you're making decisions from that, then your decisions will not be, you think you're making a data-driven decision based on research, but if the research is done poorly, then that input, that decision will not be the right decision for your product. And so I've seen that where it can impact the perception of the value of research. So keeping that in mind, I think, sometimes scrappy research is necessary. Sometimes that's the only choice you have. But when the stakes are lower and timelines are really tight and you have enough in-house skills to get decent data, either quick prototype testing or informal customer calls. But there are times where you might need a dedicated researcher or a research partner that can help you work through, those high stakes, more complex or politically sensitive situations where you need that level of rigor, where you need that level of depth to make sure that you have the certainty that you need to make a decision for your product.
Okay, I'm gonna take the conversation now out to your community and your craft. What are some of the ways right now, Anna, that AI is changing the way you're doing that research? And are there parts of the craft that you feel AI simply won't be able to touch for what you consider the foreseeable future?
Yeah, great question, Jay, because I have used some of those AI moderation tools myself lately, and I have seen where it's really great and also where it fails. And I'm sure it will get better over time. But to give you a concrete example, I had a study recently where we used an AI moderator, and there were things that the tool was not very good at, like my user was sharing their screen. It could not interpret what was happening on the screen. Now the technology is getting better. I'm sure over time that will not be an issue at all. But there was a moment where I had a user that they were sharing their screen. They thought they were, but they were not. And if I was there as the human moderator, I would have noticed that. I would have caught that. We would have caught that information. AI didn't know. And it seemed to ask some repetitive questions that I, as a moderator, if I were there, I would not ask again, because I know that we've already had that as part of the conversation. But where I've seen AI shine is, as researchers, we have limited time, right? So there's only so many interviews we can do in a day. And where AI is really powerful is, if we need 100 interviews overnight, you can get 100 interviews overnight. Now that comes with, were you able to recruit enough people for that? But it is possible. And so I think that's where, the use of AI, it's getting interesting, and the power that brings to a team. Because it would take a long time for a group of researchers working together to get through 100 interviews, not to mention the amount of work that comes from doing 100 interviews and having those AI tools, even though they're not perfect in doing the analysis, but giving you a sense of what are the themes that you're seeing, the trends that you're seeing in the data. I think that's really powerful.
Okay, AI is blurring the roles and responsibilities and the lines between roles in all directions. Do you foresee that this is going to mean that researchers need to become better product thinkers in the future and can do so because of AI? Or product managers need to become more considerate and better researchers in the future and can more easily step into that because of AI? Where do you see those changes possibly coming in the next 5 years?
I definitely think that these AI tools will make it easier for product managers to step into the researcher role and to have the tools to help them do better research. Do I think that researchers need better product or at least more involved in the product itself? Absolutely. As a researcher, I'm happiest when I get to work very closely with design and product. The more that I know about the product itself, what we're making, how we're making it, being part of the ideation process, that makes me better as a researcher because I know all of the context involved. I know your challenges, and even the recommendations that I can provide to you are more valuable and are more powerful when I have the opportunity to work in sync with product and design. In fact, those are my favorite times. Even doing synthesis with designers, like when I get to do that, the report is a formality because as a team, we've worked through the findings together. We know what we need to do. And the findings are that much more powerful because they're not just coming from your researcher, but you have the context, the power of a team working together. And I think absolutely that the closer we can have disciplines working together rather than just, your lane of product design research, the more powerful the outcome will be.
Okay, so sometimes those barriers that prevent teams working closer together comes down to maybe myths. Is there a research myth you wish you could shut down, or a vocabulary word that you wish product teams would step away from?
Oh gosh. That's a tough one because I feel like there's multiple things. One that I've seen very common is, oh, let's just go out and do a focus group, or let's go out and do certain interviews. And I've had product managers come to me and tell me like, oh, here's the research method we're using. And it's less about the method and it's more about what questions do we need to answer? And letting your research partner figure out how we answer that, because that's where we can bring you the most value. I feel like there's this misconception of UX research often that we're just going out and talking to the user, it's just casual conversation, but there's actually a lot of rigor and a lot of thought that a researcher puts into, the questions that need to be answered and making sure that they understand that they are working with design, that they're working with product and even engineering to make sure that they're walking the team through breaking down what are those true research questions we need to ask, and then breaking that even further into a research script or a research proposal and figuring out what are the right sets of steps that we need to take, the right methodology in order to be able to answer those research questions or those business questions.
Okay. Staying within the research methods, one of the things that for me, I feel that changed dramatically since 2020 is the amount of virtual based research when it comes to identifying those qualitative sort of components and inputs for research. If I think back 10, 15 years ago, things like contextual inquiries and face-to-face interviews were a massive part of product research for those high stakes pieces in particular. What value are you placing on face-to-face research methods versus the virtual? And when are you identifying when that's valuable versus when it's an additional overhead that it isn't going to get you any necessarily better research outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, I think starting with, in a virtual environment always gives you a starting place if that is the most accessible thing that you have in front of you at first. I think where it becomes more interesting is that your higher stake research, where you have environments that decisions like your product could make or break an experience. And we're talking about hospital environments, or we're talking about, a pilot and a dashboard of a plane and the software that they use, right? Those are very, very complex, high stake environments that you're not going to get the depth and breadth that you need. And in fact, you might even be working with other experts like human factors engineers who can give us, a broader scope or a broader insight into the ergonomics of something and that divide between what's physical and what's digital. I think environments where you might need a lot of context about what someone is interacting with outside of just, that digital experience on a screen. If you need to observe how they're doing something, what other things are they interacting with in their environment around them? I think those are, at least as a starting point, the areas where that in-person research is still invaluable. Like it's a must.
Okay. Anna, we're coming into the final third of the year here, which for many product managers is all about planning for next year. Can I ask, what are some of the changes you'd ask product managers and product leaders to be thinking about to better integrate research into their processes and practices coming into this final third of the year, and more importantly, coming into planning for next year's objectives?
Yeah, I think going back to working with your design and research partners, and if there has been research that has been done already throughout the year, having those discussions on what are the things that we're seeing, what are potential problem areas, depending on what your environment looks like. If you're seeing things that that are impacting the customer experience or the employee experience, and because those two are interconnected and they do bleed into each other. But I think getting a solid understanding of what are the problems that we're seeing in the environment, and how does that fit into what we do next, and how does that align with our business goals, right? Because the two go hand in hand, right? Making sure that we're figuring out those business goals, but that we're not forgetting the research side of the house, because one can feed into another. Because research is, at the end of the day, strategic, and something that we often forget, because UX research lives within, the little box, right, of UX design. But at the end of the day, research is strategy. It feeds into your strategy. And as a researcher, I feel that I've had the most impact when I'm working closely with product to figure out that strategy. And in fact, being in the same team as product teams, that's where I have felt the impact of my work the most, because I was able to work closely with product.
Nice. Well, finishing up on that word impact there, Anna, what's one of the most joyful moments you've had in your career as a researcher?
Oh, gosh. I think I was working at a startup in the supply chain risk space. I've never seen my work go from like 0 to deployed. And it was February, and we were basically given a mandate of this must be deployed by June. And I had to be very creative and scrappy and figuring out with the team, how do we work through understanding our user, but at the same time almost working on prototypes, because we weren't there yet. And so getting really creative in doing a hybrid study to help the team understand their user, but also start testing some of those concepts with the user and iterating on that. That was a lot of fun, because I've never seen my work go from we don't have anything all the way to, wow, we use the inputs of all of that, and now we have a product that's actually deployed.
Fantastic. I always enjoy those real world war stories from people in the industry. I really appreciate you sharing those moments today, Anna, as well as clearly your passion for the craft of research and the principles you live by. And thank you so much for coming on the show and dedicating some of your time for
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Jay. I'm always happy to have product and design discussions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you also to the audience for listening into this session with Anna and myself. I hope you've really enjoyed this moment. If you'd like to learn more about product, you can do so over at productcoalition.com.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Product Coalition podcast, hosted by Jay Stansel. Got questions or want to explore more topics? Connect with Jay on LinkedIn or join the ever-growing Product Coalition community on Substack. Thanks for listening.